Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Professor Eddie Tay, and we are here today to talk about poetry. We are here today to talk about Sylvia Plath. If you are comfortable, please do turn on your cameras, only if you are comfortable with this. This is more for my, psychological welfare, right? Because I want to talk to people. I don't want to look at screen, the black screen. Um, Okay, so only if you're comfortable. If not, then could you sort of unmute your mics and then mute them back again so I know you're here and you're present and you're listening? Okay, thank you very much. And you can all hear me, right? I am clear. You don't have to see, you don't have to look at me if you don't want to. I mean, my camera system is not very good. Okay, so I assume you're here because you are studying for the DSE. You might be taking the literature paper. You are wondering about Sylvia Plath. You're wondering about poetry, and this is why you are attending this session. I imagine this session would be for at least 30 minutes. It might go a little bit over than 30 minutes, if that's fine with you. All right, there's no reason why it can't go over 30 minutes. I will share a file now. This is basically my notes, my talking notes. As I'm talking, I'm looking at the notes. So I figured I myself be sharing the notes with you. Let me just click chat, file. Where's the PDF? There you go. I'm sharing a PDF file. So you should be able to download the file. This will just be exactly the same notes I'm using. I'll be sharing the screen with you. But before that, I mean, I'm just curious, right? I'm assuming all of you are taking the paper and you're looking at the poems. You're interested in Sylvia Plath. What are your thoughts on Plath? What do you know about Sylvia Plath? I'm assuming your teachers might have, talked to you about her. They might have talked to you about the poems. You might have some questions you might want to ask as well. But what are some of your thoughts on Plath? Anyone? You could type into the chat box, or you could just speak. That's fine. Any thoughts? No? Okay. Emotionally abused by the, okay, I got lots of stuff coming in now. Emotionally abused by her husband. She's constantly depressed in the poems. That is right. I think, we can't go away from that. The moment we look at Plath's poetry, we are also interested in her life, right? Because her poetry is known as confessional poetry. I'm sure you know the term by now. And this means, of course, this is the idea that your personal suffering, your personal life becomes the material for your poetry. And she belongs to a group known as the Confessional Poets. I'm sure, again, for example, her good friend is Anne Sexton, right? She studied together with Anne Sexton under Robert Lowell. All three of them write confessional poetry. They dealt with depression in their lives. They all dealt with suicidal attempts. And of course, they took their own lives. Sylvia Plath took her own life, as you know. All of these are facts, right? We cannot go away from the details of her life because the poems draw us into their lives, okay? So we have to be careful with this, right? Because it's about suicide and all of that. But at the same time, we are interested in poetry. So one of the things to consider, and I say this to all my students, all my undergraduates as well. In actual fact, we read her poetry as well in class. And I tell them, if you're writing an essay on literature, if you're writing on Sylvia Plath, you could talk about her life, yes, but talk about her life in such a way as to explain the poetry. Okay, don't do the opposite. Don't talk about poetry in order to explain her life. Oh, Sylvia Plath or Ted Hughes abused Sylvia Plath. You can see this from the poem. The poem talks about this. Therefore, Ted Hughes is a bad person. That kind of argument doesn't work, right? As a literature essay, you should do it the other way around, right? you would want to say, for example, the details of her life tells us something about the poetry. So the focus of it has to be the poetry. So this is important when you're writing your essays and you're writing for your exams and we're talking about the poems. The focus is always on the poetry, right? Yes, you can talk about her life, but you should be talking about the poetry. Talk about her life in such a way that it helps us to understand her poetry. That is the important thing to focus on, right? I will share my screen now, and I will share my notes, notes that you already have downloaded, I suppose. Okay. So this is the session on crossing the water and mushrooms. I am Professor Eddie Tay from the Department of English, CUHK. Just a bit of a caveat, right? So this is to help you to understand the texts, skills, and themes, when it comes to dealing with the literature in English at the DSE. And at the same time, it will give you a sense of, what happens at the English department at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, right? One of the things that people wonder about, of course, and yourselves, right, if you're in the final year of your secondary school studies, is should I go to CUHK? Should I study English? Should I study literature? Should I do this? Should I do that? This might give you a taste of what studying literature is like. Okay. I just want to say that I don't know what the DSE model answers are. I'm not a DSE expert, but I'm talking about Plath as a poet. I'm a poet myself. I write poetry. Of course, I teach literature. I teach courses such as reading poetry. I teach creative writing. I teach children's literature. These are the things I do. And in reading poetry, my undergraduate class, we start with Shakespeare's sonnets, and then we end with Hong Kong poetry. So we move across time and space. We try, we start with the Shakespearean sonnets, 16th century writing, literature, and then we end with 20th century poetry, right? And we, of course, we talk about English literature, and then we talk about American literature, American poetry. We also talk about Hong Kong poetry, Singapore poetry, Malaysian poetry as well. So that's kind of what I do in reading poetry in this course, right? So Plath, we know what she looks like. One of the things I want to highlight is really, and this is what I do with my undergraduate classes as well, that whenever we read a work of literature, we look at the text, right? We look at the words in front of us. We look at the book. On the other hand, we also need to understand the context. We read the text and we read around the text. For example, if I'm interested in Hong Kong poetry, surely I need to know what Hong Kong is. I need to know what Hong Kong culture is in order to understand what Hong Kong poetry is, right? So if I want to read Sylvia Plath, if I want to understand Sylvia Plath, I have to know about a little bit about her life. I need to know a little bit about what was happening in the 1950s, in the 1960s, in America and in England as well. Because as you know, Sylvia Plath, she's an American, right? But she lived in the UK with her husband. So in terms of the pressures on her, right? She is someone who wants to be known for her writing. She aspires to be a poet. At the end of her life, she began to sort of acquire some recognition. But she was married to Ted Hughes, as you know, and she helped him a lot with his career. If you know a little bit about her and her husband, you would know that Ted Hughes in his own life was recognized as a great poet. He writes his poems, he uses a pen, uses a pencil, and then Sylvia Plath would type out his poems for him and send his poems to various magazines and help him win prizes and all this. But she herself writes her, her own poetry as well. She wrote a novel as well, a novella, right? The Bell Jar, as some of you might know. So she lived at a time in which there is only a kind of role for a woman, right? If you are a young woman, you can only do certain things. And, if you understand what some of the pressures are on her in her lifetime, then you would understand her works. In some of the comments you said, she was abused. She's always depressed. But yes, it is important to recognize that. But when we say she was abused and she is depressed, you are in a way personalizing the experience. This is about her, the person that she was. This is personal, right? This is about personal life, yes. On the other hand, we have to understand the social pressures as well. They're acting on her, right? So her poetry tells us something about her personal life, yes, but it tells us something about the society as well, that in which she lived. So just this is just some background reading that you might want to do on your own. A useful book to go to, and it's quite a thick book, so I don't expect you to read the whole thing. If you're interested, go borrow the book from the library, look at it. In fact, just read one of the chapters, The Problem That Has No Name. That chapter is important. And here are some quotations from there that tell us a little bit about what life was like for Sylvia Plath. The book was published in 1963. If you might know this already, Sylvia Plath took her own life in 1963. So this book more or less is relevant to what was happening in America, right, at that time. So Betty Friedan, the author, wrote about American women. And he says there is a problem, the problem that has no name. In the 1960s, what is the problem? The problem lay buried, unspoken, and for many years in the minds of American women. It was a strange stirring, a sense of dissatisfaction, a yearning that women suffered in the middle of the 20th century in the United States. Each suburban wife struggled with it alone, okay? She made the beds, shopped for groceries, matched slipcover material, ate peanut butter sandwiches with her children, chauffeured Cub Scouts and brownies, lay beside her husband at night, and she was afraid to ask even of herself the silent question, is this all? Is this all? Every day the woman takes care of the children. She shop for groceries, she cook for the family, she takes care of her husband, and then at night she asks herself, is this all there is? Right? If you are familiar with 1950s and 1960s America, and this is an advertisement from that era, you would know there's the inventions of the vacuum cleaner, washing machines, fridge, the refrigerator, and all of that. And then women, right, are always the ones shown to be using all of these things. Women do all the household chores. Okay, so women are supposed to be happy because they have all these new machines to deal with at home. They're supposed to take care of the baby. They're supposed to wave their, kiss their husband goodbye in the morning when he goes to work, and then welcome the husband home when he comes back in the evening, and then serve him a nice dinner. Right? She's supposed to take care of the kids. Okay, so this is the kind of situation that the American housewife, the American woman in the 1950s and 60s, they found themselves in. They lived in nice houses. So why wouldn't they be happy, right? They should be happy. But every woman struggle with this alone. They are not happy. They don't have the language to say that they are not happy because everything around them tells them they should be happy. Advertisements like this, if they watch TV and it was, I Love Lucy and, TV shows like that, they are supposed to be happy and contented with their everyday life, with their husbands, with their children. So why should they be unhappy? So they don't have the language for this. Nonetheless, emotionally, they would ask, is this all there is? Am I just supposed to cook and, be a housewife and that is it? So this again is another paragraph that talks about this. The new washing machines, change the sheets twice a week instead of once. They have 5 children, beautiful house, and their occupation, housewife. Okay, so are they satisfied during this period? They should be. They got all their new electric waxer, waxing the floor and all of this. They have all these machines to keep them occupied. They should be happy, right? And the dominant role for them is the housewife. They should be the happy housewife. What's wrong with them? There must be something wrong with them if they are not happy. So this is a personal problem. If you're not happy, there's something wrong with you personally, right? Then this is your own personal problem. However, the thing is, of course, she says, this is not just a personal problem. She says, I heard a mother of 4 having coffee with 4 other mothers, right, say in a tone of quiet desperation, the problem, there is a problem with our lives. And the others knew that she was not talking about a personal problem. She was not talking about a problem with her husband or children or home. It's not like, oh, the home is dirty, she has to clean it, or the children are naughty. Not that, right? They all share the same problem. Suddenly, you realize this is not a personal problem. This is a social problem. If a group of people, right, share the same problem, then the problem is belongs to a community. The problem is a social problem. The problem that has no name. So in Betty Friedan's book, there's a chapter, I believe it's chapter 3, called The Problem That Has No Name. And they began to talk about it. Two of the women cried, just to know they were not alone in feeling this. So you could say, yes, Plath was depressed. Plath dealt with, emotional problems. Is that a personal problem? Or is that a problem that sort of is linked to the way in which society was organized, right? What was this problem that has no name? This was the question. What is the problem for women at that time? I feel empty somehow, incomplete. I feel as if I don't exist, right? And then she blotted out the feeling with a tranquilizer. You take drugs to deal with the problem, okay? Or you thought, what she really needed was to redecorate. Well, I feel unhappy, or maybe I should redecorate the house. Or I feel unhappy, maybe we should move house, go to a better neighborhood. Or I feel unhappy, maybe I should have an affair. Or I should have another baby. This will solve my problem. But the unhappiness is not just, these are not the solutions, right? There has to be a change to society. The problem has to do with the way in which society was organized, the expectations that were placed on them, okay? And then, of course, we can no longer ignore the voice within women that says, I want something more than my husband and my children and my home. All right, so that is, I want to be more than just a housewife. This book was written in 1963 by an American, and Plath took her life in 1963. So you know the overall emotional sort of state at that point, right, for women, 1960s America. Okay, so this is the situation for women. I'm sure in Hong Kong we have the same sort of sometimes the same kind of expectations, right? There's a Cantonese phrase that says the woman must be able to go into the kitchen and she must be able to be in the living room, right? What's that phrase? My Cantonese is not good. I'm from Singapore, so my Cantonese is not very good. Could somebody tell me the phrase? Could somebody say the phrase, the one about being able to go into the kitchen and being able to go into the living room?
入得廚房，出得廳堂。
Thank you very much. That's right. Who said that? Sorry.
Hi.
Hi, is that your name?
No, my username starts with 68. My name is Ma Shek Wai.
Okay. Ma Shek Wai, is that right? Thank you for that. That's good, right? So, even in modern Hong Kong, there's a kind of expectation, right? So 1960s America, okay? And I have this picture, the Queen's Gambit. I wonder if you have watched the TV series. You're familiar with this, the Queen's Gambit. Beth, she became the world's champion. I mean, this is fictional, but the world's champion in chess and all of that. But her stepmother dealt with the problem that has no name, right? Her stepmother, the husband left her, and she doesn't know what to do, right? She was depressed. She was smoking all the time. She drinks all the time, and then now she realizes her stepdaughter has a talent, and therefore she spent her life, giving the opportunities to her, the stepdaughter, right? So if you have watched this TV series, you will kind of know the background, the social background for women at that point in time, right? So I just put it here in case you have watched this TV series and you sort of understand the background at the time. So this is The Problem That Has No Name, 1960s, with the book by Betty Friedan, right? The other sort of thing I want to highlight is by Aileen Sisu, Love the Medusa. It's a very famous essay written in 1976. So this is an essay on women's writing, feminine writing, right? How do we begin to articulate, we meaning women, how do women begin to write for themselves, right? So you could look at this essay And you could find this essay, easily, right, through the internet. Medusa, of course, we know Medusa is from the Greek mythology, a woman with hair made of snakes, and she could turn people into stone. So the Medusa is a very scary kind of monster. It is a problem for men. Men try to defeat Medusa, and men have been turned to stone for that. So the laugh of the Medusa is a kind of feminist manifesto about how the female writer can be a kind of Medusa, right? Powerful, monstrous figure, right? So as to fight against men, if you like, right? So what is so by looking at this essay, we could actually think about Sylvia Plath as well. Hélène Cixous, the French critic, says women must write herself, write about women and bring women to writing. Women must put herself into the text. Okay? When I say woman, I'm thinking about women in the struggle against conventional men who expects women to fit into a certain role, right? So she says, in literature, there is such a thing as male writing. There's such a thing as marked writing that is marked by manhood. And when you look around you, the social order is a very masculine order, masculine economy. Okay, and for her, she uses the word phallocentric tradition. Phallocentric come from the word phallus. Phallus meaning the male sexual organ. Centric, center. The male sexual organ is at the center of the literary tradition. She's saying that, right? She's using very sexual sort of imagery to talk about this. The self-admiring, self-stimulating, self-congratulatory phallocentrism. Okay, look up that word on your own. There are loads of things interesting things to think about. Right, the idea that society is organized around phallocentrism. What does this mean? So it's society is built around male desire, male-centered modes of behavior is the one that would be dominating. So in Hong Kong, competition. All right, in terms of your studies, in terms of your work, one-upmanship, we are all trying to beat one another, be better. It's about male ego and all of that, right? In literature, if you think about it, even some novels by women sometimes can be phallocentric. If you know Jane Austen's novels, yes, there are female protagonists, but what is their concern? Their concern is to have good marriages. Why? The problem is that the wealth and property are in the hands of men. Women cannot inherit property. So if you are a woman, if you are a daughter, you do not inherit your father's wealth, right? You need to then marry a man of equal wealth to your father, right? In order to have the same kind of lifestyle, okay? So that's a fact. This is a social world. This is how the world was ordered in Jane Austen's novels. Shakespeare as well. If you are familiar with Shakespeare, the concern is always with people like Hamlet, King Lear, Macbeth. Whereas the female characters are either weak and innocent, people like Ophelia and Cordelia, not very ideal. They are innocent, they are pure, and all of that, but they are weak. Or they are powerful and evil, right? Lady Macbeth, the witches in Macbeth, all of that. So in literature, you always find that kind of phallocentric, male-centered kind of stories. Everything revolves around men and their desires for power, right? Even in everyday life, you see this. And I'm showing you this picture. This is, from the South China Morning Post, right, 2013. Even buildings, skyscrapers, right, are symbols of the male desire for power. Okay, the very phallic symbol that is very clear what that looks like, right? Even in London, buildings like this. And if you look around the landscape of Hong Kong, every single skyscraper is a phallocentric symbol that talks about male power, male competition, all of that. Right? So in literature, right? So we're talking about social order. On the other hand, there's also the literature, right? In the realms of literature, what should we do? So what would a non-phallocentric social world look like? What would it mean to be writing against phallocentrism? Okay, Hélène Cixous says, well, I don't want to define what a feminine type of writing is. I don't want to define the feminine voice, because to define it is to code it, is to enclose. If I say feminine writing is A, B, and C, then it's just A, B, and C. It cannot be D, E, F, and G. Therefore, I do not want to define this. I leave it open-ended as to what a kind of resistant literature might be like. I leave it open as to what a kind of feminine literature might be like. Okay? So in Sylvia Plath, when we come to Sylvia Plath, we can say, hey, wait a minute. In her life, she was dealing with this, right? In her everyday life, you know about Ted Hughes, you know about how she suffered, how she was abused. Therefore, in her poetry, we can see her inner life. Her voice is the voice that is against that kind of male social order. And in Mushrooms, I think we can see that very clearly. Once you have set up the context, then you begin to understand mushrooms. I can read mushrooms alongside the kind of social factors, the kind of social processes, the kind of social environment that Plath was living in, right? Mushrooms is a poem about resistance. Why? We know literally on the literal level, it is about mushrooms. Right, on the very surface level, it's just imagine a bunch of mushrooms growing and growing, and then they go into your door. That's the literal meaning of mushrooms. But the figurative meaning, right? The other meaning, the figurative meaning of mushrooms would be about quiet resistance. It would be about a community that is once weak. We were once weak, but now we are quietly taking over. So you could say that this is a kind of female, feminist, poetic manifesto. Mushrooms. All right. The lines are very clear, right? Overnight, very quietly, discreetly, very quietly. Right? The notion is on silence. Emphasis is on being imperceptible at first. You cannot notice. Right? They are very, very small. They are humble. You cannot notice them. They do this very quietly, and that makes them even more scary, more threatening. Then there's the attention drawn to the physicality, right, of the mushrooms. Of course, mushrooms, noses, toes. So you know she's not just talking about mushrooms. Our toes, our noses, right? The physicality of people. These are people she's talking about. We grow, we take hold, we control the ground, right? Our feet are now on the ground. We take hold, we control the land. We acquire the air. We take possession of the air. They breathe in the air, right? So on the one hand, it can be about mushrooms. On the other hand, of course, it can be about people taking over the environment, taking over the land, taking over the air. Nobody sees us, stops us, betrays us, because this is quiet, right? This is a movement that is very quiet. This is well organized. This is also very undercover as well. The small grains make room. So the world begins to shift. The physical environment begins to shift to make room for them to emerge. And gradually you go from toes to noses to fists, right? They become strong and powerful. They have fists. Now, yes, they are soft, but they are fists. Now they can fight, right? Heaving the needles, the leafy bedding, even the paving. Now, from fists, you go to hammers, right? Weapons. Our rams, the battering ram, right? They are breaking down the door with the battering rams. Earless and eyeless, perfectly voiceless. So again, we're reminded, yes, it's about people, right? Invading a certain territory. On the other hand, it is also, again, about mushrooms, eyeless, earless, voiceless, right? They are voiceless, but now they are coming through, right? The voice is going to make, the voices are going to make themselves heard. Now they are still voiceless, fine. They are quiet. Widen the crannies, so whatever holes, the little gaps in the walls or whatever, they are opening up all those gaps, right? We dine on water, so they are very, they need very little to sustain themselves, or they are given very little to support themselves, but they are strong. Asking little, so many of us. So this is not just one person, this is a community. We are shelves, we are tables, so they are in the background. In fact, they form the infrastructure of your everyday life, right? We are like the shelves in your home. We are like the tables in your home. We are the furniture in your home. So the women are like furniture at home, but you cannot do without us. We know this now. We support your everyday life. Without shelves, all your things will collapse. Without tables, you can't have dinner, right? You will need us. We know. We are meek, right? Nudges, that we are edible. Nudges, shovels, in spite of our kind multiplies. Again, multiplication, the sense of emerging, the sense of growing, the sense of expansion is there. We shall by morning inherit the earth. Our foot's in the door. So you can imagine somebody is pushing their way in. The foot is in the door. It's too late. You can't close the door on them now because the foot blocks the door, right? It prevents the door from closing. We shall by morning inherit the earth. So this is a very important line, inherit. And if you realize we are meek, the word meek, inherit the earth. The Christians among us will recognize this to be an allusion, right? It references the Bible, the very famous verse from the Bible. Let me just go to here quickly, right? This is Matthew chapter 5, verse 5. This is Jesus' sermon on the Mount. He actually was preaching to the congregation about Christianity. He was preaching about how the weak can become strong. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Very famous line here to people who know the Bible, right? So this is Jesus' words, right? What is interesting is that the Sylvia Plath is borrowing the words of a very powerful man in order to talk about women, right? So she's borrowing a man's words in order to talk about women becoming powerful. We shall by morning inherit the earth, our foot's in the door. So this is a kind of resistant writing, okay? A writing about subversion, a writing about overturning the social order, a writing about possible change. So if you understand, what I've said earlier on about Betty Friedan, about the feminine mystique, about a problem that has no name, now the problem has a name, right? That women want to be more than just housewives. Women want to do more for themselves. Women have ambitions of their own. So our foot is in the door. Now it has a name and the movement is beginning. So you could say that this poem is a poetic feminist manifesto. You could read this as such, right? The literal meaning, of course, it's about mushrooms growing. This is at one level. The figurative meaning, the deeper underlying meaning, the idea that a quiet and once weak community is taking control and gaining strength. Right, so here are some of the notes that I have, but I've talked about them already earlier on, right? How they're gaining strength. And I think these two pictures are interesting, mushrooms. So if you compare the mushrooms to the people around Jesus, right, in the painting, okay, the mushrooms will grow just as the Christians will grow, the Christian community will grow to become a very powerful force in society, even later in history as well. So the mushroom, likewise, maybe the mushroom representing women will grow. The ambition of women, the power of women, the life force of women, women's voices will grow as well. Okay, so that's the kind of parallel that's being drawn between mushrooms and Jesus, right? The voice of the mushrooms and the voice of Jesus. The meek shall inherit the earth, right? Right, it is about using biblical language, borrowing the voice to give strength to women's voices and presence. Okay? So you could say this is a poem, a form of writing against phallocentrism, right? Against the male literary or social order. The next poem, Crossing the Water, I think is very, it relies on images. Just like the earlier poem, of course, we have the image, right? We see certain things. And straight away, a few things would strike us. Crossing the water, the title itself tells us there is a crossing of boundaries. Is the persona, maybe Plath herself, maybe not. This person is, in water, crossing over, going from one place to another. So there's a crossing of boundary. There's a sense of transgression here. And immediately, the poet uses words very carefully. And if you see certain words recurring, black, 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 black. In the first stanza, you see the word black so many times. Shadows, right? Dark advice, so many of this. Blackness, okay? The idea of being blinded. All of that, darkness, being unable to see, blackness. So we know we associate the notion of blackness with being unable to see, being lost, being gloomy as well. Black lake, black boat, two black cut paper people. Very strange. Cut paper people. What does that mean? Um, Again, there are two levels here, two levels of reality. On the one hand, she is describing people on the boat, maybe herself with another person, right? People on the boat. They might be touring around. Canada. There's a reference to Canada. We know Plath traveled all over the U.S. with her husband. She went to Canada as well. We can imagine this might be her and her husband on the boat cruise maybe, right, in Canada. We can just guessing here, right? But the fact that this is a confessional poem tells us we can understand this poem, and we can draw from her life experience in understanding this poem. So this might be Canada. On the one hand, it is about a tour that she has. She was on a boat. This is the physical reality. If you are on a boat, you are sort of on a holiday. You should be happy. You should be relaxed. But there is an inner reality. So there's the external reality. She's on a boat cruise. The inner reality is that I everything is black for me. Everything is dark for me. I see people, but these are cut paper people. What is cut paper people? Cut paper. This is it, right? You cut little out of paper. So people are flat. The people are repetitive, impacted. The people are manufactured. Cut paper people as manufactured artificial cheerfulness. These are things that we sort of decorate the room with on the birthday and things like this. Artificial cheerfulness. Okay, people who are not really living. And maybe these are people who are going through a living death. So she sees the people, maybe herself, maybe the husband, maybe the people on the boat, as cut out people, cut people paper. They are fragile. They are not real people. They don't live. They are like robots. Okay, where do the black trees go that drink here? Where is nature? Where the black trees are here, right? Where do they go now? So it's very odd line. If you can, how do they find sustenance? How do black trees survive? There's so much blackness here. After drinking of the water, where does it go? Can black trees move? So there's a sense of foreboding. It's a very gloomy kind of environment. The mood is gloomy. The movement here is slow. They are on a boat. The boat moves slowly. Just like in the earlier poem, the movement is very slow and very quiet. Here it is the same. Shadows must cover Canada. Of course, this is not literal. The shadows of black trees covering Canada. This is not a description of real life. This is a description of her mind, the internal landscape of her mind. So we see two realities, right? The external landscape and the internal landscape of her mind. So there is a light from water flowers. What are water flowers? Water lilies, because later on, right, she talks about the lilies here. Okay, so she mentions the waters here. There's a light. So we know there's overwhelming darkness. The whole landscape is dark. Just imagine if it's, it's stormy. The storm is going to come soon. But the light is now emerging. So there's a little bit of hope, right? Light represents hope. Their leaves do not wish us to hurry. So leaves from the water, so water lilies. You could imagine water lilies over here. They are on the boat, and maybe the leaves are slowing the boat down, right? The boat doesn't want to, the boat is traveling, but the leaves are slowing the boat down. The boat is resisting the leaves. Okay, where is the boat going? Right, all the sense of darkness and everything, right? The leaves do not wish us to hurry. They are round and flat and full of dark and fire. So the leaves seem to be talking to her. The leaves seem to be talking. So surely this is not a literal description, right? This is not about the external landscape. This is all happening in her mind. It's as if the leaves are talking to her, or talking to people, giving her advice as to what to do. Cold words shake from the oar. So there's an oar. Somebody is, ferrying the passengers in the boat, and so now the blackness is in us. It is in the fishes. Okay? The darkness is within us now. For the darkness comes from the landscape. Now the darkness has entered us. A snake is lifting a valedictory, a pale hand. Very strange line here. But if a snake represents an obstacle. A snake, it might be a stone that is in the way of the boat. The stone wants to give a speech. A valedictory is a speech of farewell. Usually when you graduate from the university, you give a valedictory speech, right? It's a speech of farewell, a speech of celebration, speech in which you say goodbye to the congregation, to the people who are graduating. Okay, so it's as if the stone is in a way it wants to say goodbye. Why goodbye? What is a pale hand? Whose hand? The hand belonging to the oar. Is it a pale hand that's arising from the water, stopping the boat? What is this? So we know this is a very macabre, M-A-C-A-B-R-E, macabre kind of situation here. Darkness, death, blackness. You will say, hey, maybe, this is a scene about Charon. Okay, so maybe you could read this to be about a boat, the ferryman, Charon, the ferryman who ferries the souls of the dead across river Styx into Hades. This is from the Greek mythology, right? And Plath is having, so she's again in the poem. There are two landscapes. She compares the physical landscape with the internal landscape. In her mind, maybe she's imagining herself to be on a boat, right, in which the ferryman is bringing her into Hades, into the underworld, into death. So there is a sense of death, sense of foreboding here, right? Astounded souls. The boat is full of astounded souls. The souls are just shocked. They don't know what to do and what's happening to them. Right? Maybe they have just died. So this can be a poem about death. Stars open among the lilies. Is there hope? Maybe there's still some hope to this environment, right? The lilies, they do look like stars, right? So amidst the gloom and darkness, there is a bit of hope there, and she's holding on to this bit of hope. Okay? Are you not blinded by such expressionless sirens? If you look at the sirens, can be the sound. The sirens, maybe the lilies are speaking to her. The sirens, the call as well, are calling to her, and yet they're expressionless. They're so quiet. So it is like a very paradoxical situation. You're looking at the flowers, and you think that the flowers are talking to you, and yet at the same time, they are very quiet. Two things can be happening at the same time. Right? In the external reality, of course, the flowers do not talk. But in her mind, she thinks that the flowers are talking to her, giving her advice. Okay? So everything in the landscape speaks to her. Here is a mind that is struggling with two realities. On the one hand, the everyday reality, the common reality, people around her are enjoying themselves. They are on a boat ride, they are on a cruise, they are on holiday, they might be happy. But in her mind, she has that inner dark vision of hers. And she knows that they are totally incompatible. Right? My external landscape, I should be happy. But my internal landscape, tells me I am not happy. Right? So she's struggling. In the poem, you see a struggle between two kinds of reality, and the struggle remains there, it's still there at the end of the poem. It ends there. The silence of the astounded souls. It doesn't end with, oh, in the end, I come back to reality. I've forgotten all the darkness. She doesn't say that, right? She ends there. The poem remains open-ended. She's still struggling with the inner darkness. Okay, so the poem is constructed out of associations, connotations, suggestions. She's not saying I am in darkness. Oh, I'm going to die. Oh, I'm like very sad, and I have a bad mood and all that. She's not saying that in a very direct manner. She is suggesting, right, that mood for us: blackness, darkness, cold worlds. All of that is just working through suggestions, hinting at the kind of world that she lives in. Okay. So I mentioned this depressive mood, sense of disenchantment. So she's disenchanted from her everyday life. Like all the scenes around her, yes, she knows that they're supposed to be beautiful, but it's not. I'm disenchanted from it all. I am, it has lost its magic for me. the landscape, because of my inner mental landscape. Okay. So this is it. So you could see that this painting, there's a contrast to the everyday life. Nonetheless, it ends with hope. Right? There's a possibility of hope, maybe. The poem is built up of, you can say the poem is built up of feminine language about the persona's emotional struggle or detachment from everyday reality. So she gives us a snapshot of her mind at that point in time. So what I find, and I mean, just a quick conclusion, already I'm really out of time, but just a quick conclusion, poetry in general, and this applies to Plath's poems as well. Why is poetry difficult? A lot of people find that difficult, and a lot of people are very afraid of studying poetry. And as a poet myself, and as someone who teaches poetry, I love poetry because I think poetry is a form of violence that is inflicted on everyday language. Everyday language is not good enough to express our inner lives. Example, if I say I'm happy, and if you say you're happy, okay? But the word happy is not good enough. I'm happy because my wife has just given birth to a baby. You are happy because you've done well for an exam. Our experience is just given the word happy. But I'm not satisfied with the word happy. I'm not satisfied with the language. I'm not satisfied with prose, with everyday language. I have to destroy the word happy and find another way to express my inner life, to express my inner experience, to be true to myself. All right. So language is not good enough. So this is enhanced poetry. Okay. And poets are people who find everyday language unsatisfactory. And this is why poetry at some level is difficult, because we are going beyond the common uses of language. We are going beyond everyday common ways of expression. All right. Poetry is about decomposition. You decompose everyday language and you build it up again. Okay. So as to make it your own, to make it fit with your mental landscape. All right. And to read a poet is to enter his or her language and to inhabit his or her mental landscape. And this is what we have here in Plath's poetry. All right. Crossing the water, and of course, mushrooms, right? We get to inhabit her mind for a very short time. And W.C. Williams said, poetry is a machine made out of words. So I think of it as like a computer program. Poetry is like a computer program. We run the program in our minds. And because we run the program through our minds, we get to experience what did that person, what the poet experienced as well. For a moment, we experience what Plath experienced. Okay? And this is why poetry can be difficult. It can be challenging, but it can be so satisfying as well. Because we now understand the language of Sylvia Plath. Right? She's struggling with language. She's struggling with her emotional landscape. She's struggling with herself. She is also struggling with her external, everyday social forces. She's struggling with phallocentrism, right? The male-ordered landscape that just wants her to remain a housewife and a mother and nothing else. Okay? So this is my take on the two poems. Just the last bit here, just to remind you, the details of the next talk would be 22nd of March, 5 p.m. Right, how to write a good essay. So how do you, in your exams or in your essays, how do you organize them? How do you, I've read the poem, I've talked about the poems, right? How are you going to rework all of these ideas into an essay? Right, that is another thing altogether. Right, knowledge is one thing, but the demonstration of knowledge is another thing. That requires different skills, right? And writing is a form of thinking. To write is to think. So poetry is a form of writing that demands a certain kind of thinking. Likewise, when you're writing an essay, it demands a different kind of thinking. It demands a much more organized way of thinking. Okay, this is what it means to be writing a good essay. Organization. So how do you do that, right? This will be in the next talk. Okay, so I'll stop sharing now. And at this point, do you have any questions? Are there any thoughts that you might want to share with me, or do you have any questions in general? Yep, you're welcome, Winky. Yep, we could look at crossing the water in this way. You know, we can legitimize the reading of the poems uh, via her life, right? Because this is confessional poetry. We understand her life. We understand her life in order to understand her poetry. Okay, that's the important thing. Yeah, crossing to the other side. That's right, Winky. That's the title, crossing the waters, right? Crossing to the, well, it could suggest hope. You know, it could suggest crossing into the underworld as well, right? Yeah, that's right. Crossing the water. There is a sense of darkness there. Um, okay. Anything else that you might want to ask? If not, I hope you get a sense of what it means to be studying literature, right? If you ever in Chinese U, if you are studying English literature in the department, in my department, if you are taking the course reading poetry, then this is a little bit of what it means, right? This is a little bit of what happens at the lecture when I'm talking about the poems. Okay, and this is just a 15-minute session, right? But this would be a lecture. Okay, a lecture would be about 45 minutes times 2. At this point, I will probably take a break, and then for 5 minutes, and my students then will go off for 5 minutes, and they come back, and then we have another lecture. This is what a lecture is when you're studying literature. Okay, are we all good? I hope that's useful for you. Please do remember to download the PDF if you haven't done so. Right, I've sort of uploaded it in the chat box. Okay. If there's nothing else, then thank you for your time. All right. Sorry, there's a new message. Oh, okay, right. Okay, thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.